Okay folks, buckle up. Today on the Mysteria archive and as part of our mini-series The Glitch Files, we take a look at what happens when you realise that this isn't your original timeline. Get ready for a wild ride. You wake up, everything looks normal, but something's off. The sun feels colder. There's a faint hum you swear wasn't there before. You pass a building that used to be a bakery, but now it's a bank. Your friend swears they never had that conversation with you yesterday, but you remember it, word for word. And that's when it hits you. What if the world didn't change overnight, but the version of the world did? Some say reality isn't fixed, that we're living in overlapping dimensions, layered like thin sheets of glass. Most of the time, they align, but sometimes they don't. You feel a flicker, a loop, a moment that doesn't belong, a glitch. This isn't déjà vu, this is timeline bleed, and if you're starting to notice it, you might not be in your original timeline anymore. Okay, so maybe it's not exactly like waking up in a parallel universe where pizza never existed, which honestly would be a nightmare. Well, unless it was just pizza with pineapple on that never existed, that would be a win. But weird stuff happens, stuff we brush off, because the alternative, admitting that reality might not be as locked in as we think, well, that's uncomfortable. Still, when enough people start noticing the cracks, the question becomes harder to ignore. Is it memory playing tricks, or is timeline leaking? Now, if you've ever sensed something subtle change and no one else batted an eye, you're not crazy. You might just be tuned in to the real signal. Ghost code, the idea of timeline bleed. Let's start with the theory. Imagine our reality isn't a single stream of time, but one of countless layers, stacked like invisible slides in a projector. Most of the time, they're aligned, synchronized. But once in a while, due to unknown variables, they glitch. They bleed into each other, just for a moment. This is timeline bleed. It's not full-on time travel. You're not jumping into an alternative 1985 with hoverboards and evil biffs. It's more subtle, more psychological. A flicker of familiarity, a misplaced object, a dream that feels more like a memory than fantasy. People report intense déjà vu, but not in the usual way. They describe walking into a place they've never been, yet knowing what's behind every door. Or meeting someone for the first time, while remembering a conversation that hasn't happened yet. Others describe places that seem to exist halfway between here and somewhere else. One Reddit user described driving a road they'd driven every day, and suddenly finding themselves in a version of the neighborhood where the street names were slightly different, trees out of place, mailboxes on the wrong side. They looped the block, thinking they were losing it, until they turned again and everything was back to normal. Same car, same road, same brain, different version? The theory goes like this. When timelines bleed, residual data, ghost code, from an alternate version of reality seeps into our perception. It's not enough to shift you into another world, but it's just enough to make this one feel off. And once you feel it, it never really goes away. Alright, let's just say if I ever drive into a version of my town where the coffee shop turns into a dog groomer, I'm pulling a U-turn real fast. But seriously, these stories are everywhere. And no, not all of them are just trying to go viral. Some are oddly specific, consistent, like there's a pattern hiding in the weird. Now, skeptically, we could chalk this up to memory errors, neurological noise, or, one too many midnight Reddit spirals. But what if it's something deeper? Because if there's one thing the universe loves, it's messing with your sense of certainty. And timeline bleed? That's basically the universe whispering, hey, what if this isn't your scene after all? The overlap effect. Stories of cross-reality echoes. Let's talk about stories. Not theories, stories. The kind people don't shout, they whisper. Usually with a nervous laugh or a this is probably nothing but. Now take the man in Toronto who walked into a familiar diner only to find the menu had changed completely. No trace of his favourite dish. He asked the waitress about it. She gave him a weird look and said, "Sir, the item's never been on the menu." He pulled up a photo on his phone. He'd eaten it there only a month before. Same building, same booth, same logo on the napkin. But when he looked closer at the photo, the sign on the window was spelled differently. Or the woman in Nevada, who swears she visited a bookstore that doesn't exist. She described it in detail. Red awnings, worn wooden floors, a silver bell on the door that made a sound like glass being tapped with a spoon. She even bought a book there. Now, the problem? She could never find it again. Not the store, not the street, not even the book. And these aren't rare stories. Scroll through forums like Glitchy in the Matrix or deep dive blogs and you'll find hundreds of similar accounts. People stepping through some kind of dimensional draft where realities brush against each other just for a moment. And when they return, nothing feels quite the same. They call it cross-reality echo. It's not a full crossover. It's a whisper from a parallel version of your life, just loud enough to leave a trace. A receipt in your wallet, a scar you don't remember getting, a conversation no one else recalls. You didn't change the timeline. It changed around you and left just enough behind to mess with your sense of what's real. Okay, real talk. If I walked into a bookstore and came out with a book that literally vanishes from existence, I'm not questioning reality, I'm questioning whether I paid too much for decaf. But here's the thing, these stories aren't just spooky, they're structured, specific details, physical evidence, repeating themes. And could it all be confabulation? Sure, memory is a messy thing, but if enough people report the same kind of weird, maybe it's not just coincidence. Maybe there's a draft in the fabric, and sometimes reality just lets one through. And also, for the record, if any alternate version of me is out there, I hope you made it to 100,000 subscribers. Fragmented perception. Are our minds picking up residual timelines? Let's zoom in, not on the world outside, but the one inside your head. Because if timelines are leaking, how would you even know? One theory says you wouldn't. Not consciously, anyway. But your brain might notice, at least the parts of it that don't care about what's normal. That's where things get weird. Some researchers believe the brain is a filter, not a receiver. It doesn't capture all of reality. It limits it, compresses it into something manageable. But what if that filter slips? What if, just for a moment, your mind picks up information from another layer of the timeline? And some researchers explore whether unusual perception like déjà vu, dissociation, or even hallucinations might be related to residual input from alternate realities. Now, these aren't diagnoses or evidence of mental illness, but thought experiments about how perception might interact with multiple layers of reality. You hear a voice that shouldn't be there, saying something that doesn't quite fit. People with high temporal lobe sensitivity often report vivid, dreamlike memories of things that never happened, at least not here. Others experience sudden emotional shifts in familiar places, as if reacting to events they can't recall because they didn't happen here. Is it brain damage, overactive imagination, or could it be a form of memory bleed from alternate versions of yourself, echoes of lives you never lived but almost did? Here's the punchline. If the brain is a pattern-matching machine, and those patterns suddenly stop lining up, the results can feel like madness. But maybe it's not madness. Maybe it's your mind noticing the seams in reality, and maybe you were never supposed to notice. All right, now we're in the psychobabble zone, and I say that with love. Because honestly, how wild is it that your brain might be glitching on purpose? Like it's built to ignore certain inputs, and when that fails, you start seeing bonus content from a reality you never subscribed to. Of course, scientists would say it's memory distortion or temporal lobe activity. But hey, who's to say a hallucination isn't just a preview from another you running slightly ahead? It's not that you're broken, it's that you might be tuned differently. So, next time you feel like your memory's betraying you, maybe it's just trying to show you something it's not supposed to. Simulation sync errors. If this is a program, what happens when it misfires? If we are living in a simulation, and I know, big if, then here's the problem. No program runs perfectly, even the best designed systems glitch. In gaming, it's called asset recycling. You reuse trees, buildings, even skyboxes to save resources. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes not. Now, Picture that at scale, in the real world. Some researchers and theorists believe the laws of physics occasionally hiccup, not break, just slip, like a rendering error. Things like objects vanishing and reappearing in the same spot, sound with no source, or the feeling that you've lived a moment exactly before, down to the angle of light and the sound of someone's laugh. Not déjà vu, a system hiccup. In fact, some point to specific phenomena as potential signs of simulation sync errors. The double sun effect seen in sky anomalies, birds frozen mid-air, caught on camera with no wing movement, time jumps, people losing or gaining minutes with no explanation. And then there's what some call the overlay drift, when one simulated layer doesn't perfectly line up with another. You notice subtle inconsistencies, slight delays, familiar faces acting off, like an update was pushed through, but your perception hasn't caught up yet. Even physicists have dipped a toe in. Some suggest the pixelation of space-time at Planck scale could indicate we're inside a rendered universe. Others say quantum entanglement resembles spooky action or real-time communication between data points in a closed system. So, what happens when a system like this misfires? Maybe we don't see catastrophic failure. Maybe we just feel weird, out of sync, slightly displaced. Like the timeline didn't break, it just refreshed. Okay, so if reality is running on some kind of cosmic operating system, I really hope it's still not in beta, because some days it feels like the patch notes forgot to load. But seriously, have you ever had one of those moments where time just stutters, like reality lags for a second and you're the only one who noticed? Or maybe it's not a glitch, maybe it's the system syncing. And if so, we might be catching fragments of something we're not supposed to see. Not broken, just exposed. If reality is software, I just hope we're not running on beta firmware, or worse, Windows ME. Ancient echoes. Were older civilizations aware of timeline loops? We think of timeline theories as modern, born from quantum physics, computers and internet forums. But what if we're just rediscovering something ancient? All over the world, myths and religious texts speak of time not as a line, but as a cycle. In Hinduism, time unfolds in repeating yugas, vast cosmic ages that reset after collapse. The Norse believed in Ragnarok, the end and rebirth of the world in a perpetual loop. Greek mythology spoke of successive ages of man, each more corrupted than the last. These aren't just poetic endings, they're system resets. And then there's the Mayans. Their long count calendar wasn't about the end of the world, it was about the end of a cycle, the close of one version of reality and the start of another. Even Plato, in his writings on Atlantis, hinted at forgotten civilizations wiped from memory, not by time, but by repetition, as if humanity has done all of this before and will do it again. Now, some researchers believe ancient monuments like the pyramids or Göbekli Tepe aren't just spiritual sites, but time markers, anchors, maybe even beacons across versions of reality. It raises the question, were ancient civilizations trying to preserve data across timeline loops, not in language, but in stone, geometry, myth? Symbolism that bypasses translation, that survives resets. Maybe their stories weren't warnings about the future. Maybe they were memos from the past, sent forward to us. Because if time really is layered, if timelines bleed and reset, then these myths might not be metaphors. They could be fragmented memory, echoes of a glitch from the last version of Earth. Okay, look, if ancient priests were just time nerds with better outfits, it kind of makes sense. Robes, check. Obsession with stars and cycles, check. Creepy symbolic calendars that loop forever, triple check. But seriously, this idea that ancient myths aren't just stories but system alerts, yeah, it's both wild and weirdly logical. Because if you wanted to send a message across resets, you wouldn't use USB, you'd carve it in stone and wrap it in a story. Also, if Atlantis was just a save file that got corrupted, let's all agree not to hit refresh this time without backing it up first. Experiments in time. Are governments aware of the shift? Here's where things take a turn, from the theoretical to the classified. If timeline bleed is real, and dimensional shifts are more than just weird dreams, then we have to ask the obvious question. Would someone try to study it or control it? Let's start with CERN, the Large Hadron Collider. Now, most physicists will tell you it's just smashing particles together to understand the origins of the universe. But some theorists think the real reason might go deeper, that certain high-energy experiments could be poking holes between realities or stitching timelines back together. In 2016, a video claiming to show a ritual outside CERN's HQ went viral, which was later dismissed as a prank by CERN officials. Most called it a hoax, but it didn't stop speculation that something bigger might be going on underground. Then there's Project Pegasus, allegedly a US black budget program from the 1970s. According to alleged insider and whistleblower Andrew Basiago, it wasn't about weapons or surveillance, it was about teleportation and time manipulation. He claims he travelled through chrononaut tunnels and that the tech was used to send select individuals, including children, through space-time corridors. Even more fringe, the Montauk Project. Supposedly based out of an old Air Force station on Long Island, it's been linked to mind control, psychic amplification, and time rift experiments. It's basically Stranger Things, if Stranger Things filed FOIA requests. The uniting thread in all these stories? That someone, somewhere, knows the timeline isn't stable, and they've been quietly working to either fix it or manage its fallout. Because if the world is running on glitchy code, someone out there is definitely trying to find the control panel. Alright, so if CERN is actually moonlighting as the universe's IT department, someone should really update the help desk. Seriously though, when the same themes keep cropping up across unrelated stories, teleportation, mind experiments, time loops, it starts to feel less like a conspiracy and more like a breadcrumb trail. Now, do I believe a group of kids were sent to Mars via time tunnel? Probably not, but do I believe governments run classified experiments we never hear about until 30 years later? Absolutely. So, if some black budget lab figured out how to peek between timelines, you better believe they'd keep that tech locked up tighter than a government cafeteria cookie recipe. This isn't your original timeline, or is it? Let's bring it back to you. Maybe you haven't stepped through a rift. Maybe you don't have a disappearing bookstore story. But have you ever just felt off? Like the world around you doesn't quite match your memory? Here's a thought. What if timelines aren't global? What if they're personal? Some theories suggest that reality isn't shared, it's filtered. Rendered for each of us in real time, based on observation and attention, kind of like a video game with adaptive rendering. You're the player. The engine builds the world around you, and sometimes it stutters. What we think of as timeline glitches, those weird, unexplainable moments, could be signs that your version of reality is desynced from others, not broken, just slightly off axis. Ever walk into a room and forget why you're there? And maybe you entered a version of the room that your mind hadn't fully rendered yet. Ever swear you heard someone say something they never did? Maybe they said it, but in a timeline you no longer occupy. And if your life is a thread in a vast tangled web of parallel versions, then maybe the glitches are you brushing against a different you. A version who made a different choice, took a different path. One step to the left and everything changed. So, maybe this isn't your original timeline, or maybe it is. But reality has just diverged too many times to tell the difference anymore. And the scariest part, you might be the only one who noticed. Honestly, if this is an alternate timeline, then that explains the whole madness of pineapple on pizza. But for real, this idea that reality is rendered per user is trippy, but it checks out because sometimes the weirdest part of life isn't what's happening, it's that no one else seems to notice it happening differently. And maybe reality's a solo mission. Maybe we're all syncing to our own frequency. Or maybe you're just sleep deprived, standing in the kitchen again, wondering how you even got there. Either way, welcome to your timeline. Closing reflection. Maybe it was never meant to line up. So here we are, one timeline, one version of you, sitting inside a moment that might not have been meant to exist. Maybe the bakery was a bookstore. Maybe that scar really did come from something you don't remember. Maybe the people who disappeared from your life didn't leave. Maybe they were never in this version. It's a strange thought, isn't it? that reality isn't fixed, but flexible, editable, that what we call truth is just the version that loaded correctly. And maybe this isn't your original timeline, but what if there was no original? What if reality is a fluid script, rewritten, reshot, and rerun more times than we'll ever know? Ancient myths, modern anomalies, simulation glitches, they might be all pointing at the same thing, that existence isn't about permanence, it's about perception. And if you're noticing the cracks, the bleed-throughs, the overlaps, the ghost memories, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're awake, aware, tuned into a reality that was never meant to line up neatly. So, the next time something feels off, don't ignore it, don't dismiss it, because sometimes the glitch is the clue. And maybe, just maybe, you're not lost between timelines, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Okay, deep breath. Well, that one got philosophical, huh? But seriously, if you've ever had that weird gut feeling that reality blinked for a second, you're not alone. And maybe those moments aren't malfunctions. Maybe they're invitations to look closer, to ask better questions. Or maybe it's just your timeline doing a little maintenance. Either way, thanks for traveling with me through this glitchy rabbit hole. And hey, if anything feels different tomorrow, maybe it's not you. Maybe it's just the update rolling out. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Please let me know in the comments below videos you would like to see next. Okay, my friends, until next time, stay curious.